I'm delighted to see all of you coming on such a terrible night. You're wonderful to have come to this forum. And I'm Ellen Hume. I'm a former journalist from America. Hi. And a teacher. And now I am a media fellow here at Central European University. And I want to thank some people for helping us make this event possible. And first of all, Rector John Shattuck from CEU, my dear husband, who puts up with a lot. Thank you. And also the CEU Human Rights Initiative. They helped to sponsor us today. It's a small miracle, actually, that this event is happening at all. 3 of the crucial people who were planning it from the start are sick. First, I have to mention Magda Matake from Roma Chris and from Harvard, who could not get out of Boston. Esther Young, how do I say her name? Okay. From TAS is sick with the flu. And Sylvie Varo, who made some videos with Andras that we're going to see in a few minutes, is also unable to come because she's ailing. So 3 really important people aren't here. And I promised them that the video would be the substitute for their presence, but we miss them very much. We have a great panel, and Nick will introduce them shortly. The other thing to know is that we have some really well-informed people right here in the room. You all know who you are. It's basically all of you. But many of you are activists, lawyers, you know very well what we're talking about. And our goal is to have short comments from the panel so you will participate in this discussion. So it's really important to know that our point is to have you make comments and have questions. But everyone should speak briefly and to the point, including panelists, because we want to have as much participation as possible. And I want to say we are really lucky to have as a moderator today Nick Thorpe, known to many of you, Nick. He is a BBC correspondent here in Hungary. He is an honorary Hungarian. He has been here for, is it 27 or 28 years? 27. He has a Hungarian family, 5 Hungarian sons. And Nick went with us in April when American filmmaker Patrice O'Neill and I went around Hungary introducing the idea, not in our town. And what we were doing is trying to find positive examples of communities, as Patrice has done in the US, communities that have come together despite their ethnic, religious, sexual orientation, background, class, economic, and other differences in order to eradicate hate speech and hate crimes in their communities. There are communities that are trying to do this, and we found that there are people in Hungary trying to do this also. Our workshops last spring inspired a website, and I'm proud to be launching it here today. And our aim with the website is to link together people that we found are working sometimes in isolation and in danger to build a more peaceful, safe, and tolerant Hungary. And the website is nálunk-nem.org, and it's a homegrown Hungarian version of Patrice O'Neill's original Not in Our Town movement. So, not in our town. We don't want hatred in our town. Instead, people who join this effort support efforts to find common ground and live together in peace and respect despite our differences. This is also a fundamental principle at CEU, which, as you all know, we are working very hard to achieve, and it isn't easy. So, here is the website. And I wanted to show you some of the things about it. You can see that the wonderful faces on the picture bar represent Hungarians, non-Hungarians, people from all different backgrounds. And the homepage talks about the project. That's where we are. And we've just gone into Magyar because it's also in Magyarul. And About Us describes more about the Not in Our Town project in Hungary. And this is one of my favorite parts of the website. It actually invites people, ordinary people, without money, without government support, without anything, to take actions in their own communities, whether it's in your school, your town, and it has suggestions for what you can do. You can challenge hate speech by painting over graffiti. You can talk to the media, heaven help you with that. I'm a former journalist, I know how hard that is, to tell them that they shouldn't be stereotyping people. You can get to know your neighbors in a more cooperative way. So these are some suggestions of what can be done. We also wanted to highlight some projects, and I wanted to mention that one of the great projects that we found out about is in Szombathely. It's a tolerance festival that's going to be happening November, is it 15 and 16, Marta? Yes. Where are you? And it's an extraordinary festival of culture, art, literature, music, public life, and discussions, including difficult discussions, exactly along the lines of how do we live together if we're so different. And Marta Goldman, please stand. Marta is the school teacher, the university teacher, who has spearheaded this wonderful event. And it built out of a Jewish festival in the past, and now it's extended to Roma especially. And we're just delighted you could be here today. And if you have questions and you want to go to this festival, please see Marta afterwards. There's a small reception afterwards. Okay, I'm going to move right along because we want to hear from our panelists. But it's important for you to know that we're mapping these areas of tolerance around Hungary. And if you have one that you think we should put on the map, there is a contact us form here. And we have many partners in this project. We're very proud of them. And you can see the list on the website. So thank you all for looking at our launch. And, oh, the films, that's the most important thing I forgot. In this website, we show the original films that Patrice O'Neill offered, and they have Hungarian subtitles. And they show examples of how ordinary human beings came together and actually made a difference to build a safer and happier community. So these films are definitely available for you to use if you want to. We're also building some information about Roma history, and that's also something we're hoping to put more of on our website. It's really important to recognize that this work is done by volunteers. We don't have any money. We're not paid. And I want to, just at this very moment, thank the people who built this website for us. And Csilla Farkas, are you here? Is Csilla here in the room? No, of course not, because she's out welcoming people in the hall. Csilla Farkas is the staff director of this project, and is Mishi Giros in the room? Mishi, please stand. Mishi is the guy who built the website. He's a future Olympian, we don't know this yet, we're hoping, marathon runner, and you've come, I believe, from Vesprem to come to our event tonight. So thank you, Mishi, for making this website for us. And he was assisted by Andrea Parak, who designed it. So we want to thank all these people who did this work. Thank you so much. I also want to thank especially Richard Fisk and Ildiko Moran for their extraordinary work pulling together this forum in the middle of many other events. Thank you so much for helping us with this. And I wanted to say that in addition to having these workshops that Patrice and I and Nick took on the road throughout Hungary in April, there have been outcomes beside the website. The website is just a small thing. But we have here tonight Professor György Csepeli György of ELTA, who has been holding circles of tolerance in some towns in Hungary, showing the film Csak a szél, Just the Wind, to prompt serious discussions about the impact of hate speech and hate crime in communities, and to help people think about how can we live differently. And so we're very happy you're here tonight too, György. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you. So I've used up my 10 minutes, Nick. It's now your turn.
Thank you very much, Ellen, and thank you also very much indeed for all the work that you've put in. It's one thing to thank all the individuals who've helped you, but without you, this thing would not have started at all. So thank you very much in advance. We've got a busy program. I'll introduce the panelists first. I'll say a few words, and then we'll look at a couple of the films. On my left, Stefania Kopronsai is the executive director of TAS, the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union, where she began working in 2005. She has degrees in law and sociology from ELTE, and this year she earned a second law degree from Stanford University, specializing in human rights, disability rights, and international law. Oana Mihalati began working on behalf of Roma rights in 2006 in her native Romania, working on human rights abuses cases for Romani Cris organization, which is a remarkable organization. If any of you here have never looked at their website, it's well worth it. The sheer volume of information, it's real insight not only into the situation of Roma in Romania, but into the wider region. So it's a really useful tool for all of us, I think. She's now a student, Oana is now a student in the Human Rights Law Program at CEU and is an Open Society Justice Initiative Fellow. To my right, András Várvölgyi is the founder and former editor of Magyar Narancs, was a Nieman Journalism Fellow at Harvard University, and was writer-director, it says here, of Colorado Kid.
And this is a film, I understand, right? You want to tell us what it is?
It's a film.
About 1956.
And the aftermath.
And the aftermath. Okay.
But specifically in relation to our discussion here today, he ran the Tsigan Vadászott Per blog, which was a hugely, and still remains, a hugely crucial resource for people following the trial of the serial killers. It's, as a journalist, I appreciated it because it's an example of old-fashioned journalism, really long, really interesting interviews. It may not be so popular in terms of the sort of video content, though I know they're changing that, but in terms of just the sheer content, it's well worth reading back into that for those who speak or can follow the Hungarian there. And last but certainly not least, on the far right, Oldal Horvat. I don't think you've ever been described on the far right before. Nem teljesen szélső jobboldali vagy, Alada, who I've known pretty much since I came to Hungary, is the founder of the Roma civil rights movement in Hungary and a former member of parliament. There's plenty to talk about. I'll say a few words of my own just to get the ball rolling. The title of our discussion, Hate Crimes and the Roma, Recent Lessons from Hungary. We'll be talking about hate crime laws, and all the little things that double as hate but maybe aren't. I mean, fear, resentment, inadequacy, even the desire for revenge. After the long drawn-out serial killer's trial, by the time the final verdict after appeal is reached next year probably, that will actually be 5 years after the arrests, which obviously took place in 2009, so the final verdict in 2014. And this, I think, is one of the biggest problems which faces Hungary and the Hungarian criminal justice system, this sense of the drawn-outness of the trials, how long these trials go on, how many things are dragged through the mud in the process of this. The Olas Liska trial of the killing in 2006, in that case by Roma perpetrators, that lasted more than 3 years, 4 years after appeal. Peter Huck, a well-known Hungarian, a former Liberal MP and lecturer at ELTE, pointed out in one of his contributions to András Várvölgyi's blog on the serial killers trial that in other countries, for example, he gave the case of Germany, where extremely serious issues go on trial. He gave the case of an Egyptian woman in Germany who was attacked by a German man of Ukrainian origin, who the Egyptian woman's husband went to her to try and help her. When the police arrived on the scene, they opened fire, misunderstanding the situation, on the Egyptian woman's husband, who was trying to defend his wife from a German attacker. Obviously a deeply sensitive issue in Germany. There were protests about it even on the streets of Cairo. The German justice system in that case, the incidents happened in April of that year. By the autumn, there was a verdict in the case. It was an example of a society, of a justice system recognizing the potential for violence, the potential for conflict which can emerge out of a trial situation on which that particular justice system managed to deal with. One security expert also interviewed on Andras Vagpolji's blog, Peter Tariani, commented that a unique system of justice making has evolved in Hungary in the past 15 years, in which the parties involved make justice among themselves. This is obviously extremely serious because a certain category of crime has evolved in the Hungarian countryside in which incidents, effectively low-level incidents, which are regarded by the police as crimes which sort themselves out. And one of the problems, one of the reasons, it seems, that the police reacted so slowly, were so slow to put together the different clues and realised that in the serial killer's case that they were talking about was not incidents of Roma against Roma violence, but that this was a planned criminal gang carrying out its acts from ideological or racist motives, or certainly racist motives. It took them a very long time to realise that. They lost a lot of valuable time because they saw this as part of a kind of subculture of violence in which the Roma carry out acts of violence against other Roma, in which the non-Roma carry out acts of violence against Roma or against other non-Roma. And there's a sense of the state being effectively out of control or only dealing with issues which where blood flows, and even then in a rather clumsy way, as we saw. This is obviously a subculture of violence in parts of Hungary which has been particularly fertile for a far-right party, Jobbik, to grow up in. In the serial killer's trial, the perpetrators wanted to start an ethnic conflict, which would presumably have given the far-right an opportunity to find some kind of final solution to what they regard as the gypsy problem. But who still thinks like that in Hungary today? How can they be persuaded or prevented from doing so? Are the police and the intelligence services still asleep, or have they now woken up? Will changes being contemplated in the Hungarian criminal code offer an opportunity to speed up the process of justice and improve the process of justice in Hungary? And what about the judges themselves? Obviously we're talking today not just about the serial killer's trial, but trials in which Roma have been found guilty of hate crimes against non-Roma. There's a lot to say about each of those, and I know Aladar Horvat will be speaking in particular in his presentation about the state and the role of the state in this process and in these current conflicts. But very important issues about a judicial system which is inherited from the communist period and possibly from the period before that, a sense of following the letter of the law and not looking to the impact on society of a criminal justice system in which the judges but also the prosecutors are not playing the kind of moral role, or when they do play the moral role, they're perhaps getting that moral role wrong. Also a system where where judges are afraid of making mistakes. There was the famous, among all the trials that we'll be talking about, there was the famous case of the killings, the murders in Moor, where eventually the justice system realized that serious mistakes had been made, that the verdict had to be overturned. And one of the justifications for Laszlo Misori, the judge in the serial killer's trial, taking so long, effectively 5 years, to deal with this, is clearly in the background, this fear of making mistakes in a criminal justice system. But as Peter Hack, the jurist I mentioned earlier, suggested, the judges are afraid of the judiciary becoming a moral institution. and he argued very strongly that that should be its role in a democratic society. A final word on language. The rather wooden language used by the prosecution, by the judges in their summing up of the cases, does not help the public either to follow the cases or to understand the verdict. Again, a serious problem which we in this room cannot address, but I think it's obviously one of the many factors. The language, also the language we as journalists use, quite apart from the language the judges and the prosecutors use. Finally, and probably most importantly, the motives. The serial killer's trial, in my view, it was a failed opportunity to lance the boil of racism or to address the issues of racism in Hungarian society today. The motives there were not examined, first sufficiently, either by the police in the investigative stage, not by the prosecutors in the charges that they laid, and not by the judge, although one could argue in Mr. Misori's defense that if the motives were hardly discussed in the police investigative stage in the charges, how could the judge pressurize or put more emphasis on that in the actual trial? Although I think some would argue, and I'd be interested to hear András's view on that. So with that somber introduction, let's watch a couple of the films, Anna.
Okay. Sylvie Varro, who couldn't be here, worked with András to create these spots. And we're going to show you, is it about 3 minutes each? And they are Hungarian actors reciting, I believe, sections of testimony from the serial killer's trial. Is that right, András?
Well,
You're not just do your 10 minutes, just tell me about
okay.
it.
All right. So it's while the speech of the actors whom you will be seeing, these are similar to let's say very technicist, very kind of investigative. I mean, police type of stick to the facts type of speeches, but they have a couple of quotes from the families of the victims, and you will see where they are, where they have these quotes.
Bőrük volt a bűnük. 2008-2009-ben sorozatgyilkosok vadásztak Magyarországon romákra. 6-an meghaltak, sokan megsebesültek. Rájuk emlékezünk.
Fokozatosan jutottak el a gyilkosságig. Először csak kipróbálták, milyen is emberrel lőni. A debreceni menekülttábor ablakán lőttek be koszovói cigányokra. Aztán jó ideig csak ijeszgettek. Kiválasztottak egy-egy helyszínt és éjszaka lődöztek rájuk. Galgagyörkön, Tamási pusztán embereket sebesítettek meg Piricsén és Alsó-Zsolcán. 2008. novemberében Tarnabodon akcióztak, mely a saját maguknak felállított célrendszerben teljes kudarc lett. Nem találtak, nem félemlítettek, nem jutottak semmire, még csak nem is cigányok házai voltak azok, amelyeket megtámadtak. Úgy viselkedtek, mint részegek a falusi búcsúban a céllövölde és a körhinta között. Belekötöttek volna az élő fába is, ha megtalálják. De nem találták meg. Erős elszánás következett, terepszemle, Google Maps, domborzati viszonyok. A Borsod megyei Nagycsécs faluszéli Dózsa utcáját választották. Kommandósnak öltöztek, URH rádiót vettek magukhoz, az autópályáról letérve egy földúton hagyták autójukat. A kora esti támadás során a Dózsa-György út 8-at, majd 7-et vették tűz alá. Előbbiben a támadás ideje alatt Nagy Tibor és felesége, továbbá Süketném a lányok, valamint testvére készülődött lefeküdni. A szemközti épületben Tibor bátyja József és az ő élettársa, továbbá 2 gyermekük volt. A támadás során mindkét épületre molotov koktélt dobtak. Az ezt követően leadott lövésekkel megölték Nagy Tibornét és Nagy Józsefet. Nagy Tibort súlyosan megsebesítették. Nagy Tibor és beteg kislánya elköltöztek a faluból. Nagy Ferencék, mint egy mementót állítva a gyilkos támadásnak befalaszták az utcai ablakot. A külvilág számukra nem a napfényt, hanem a halált hozó rosszat jelenti.
Bőrük volt a bűnük. 2008-2009-ben sorozatgyilkosok vadásztak Magyarországon romákra. 6-an meghaltak, sokan megsebesültek. Rájuk emlékezünk.
Nem tudni, hogy eleve akartak egy gyereket gyilkolni, vagy csak bevállalták, ha már ott vannak. Tatár-Szentgyörgyről a magyar gárda másfél évvel korábbi vonulása miatt hallottak. Úgy döntöttek, az erdő felől támadják meg a Fenyvessor 3-as számú faluszéli épületet. Távcsöves puskájával egyikük távolabbi lőállást foglalt. Ketten komótosan a kerítés nélküli épülethez sétáltak. Valamivel éjfél után dobták el az első molotov koktélt. A házpadlása lángra lobbant. Majd újabbat, ezúttal az ablakon keresztül a szobába. A tettes társ a bejárati ajtóval szemben csőre töltött fegyverrel készenlétben állt. Az épületben ekkor Csorba Róbert, felesége Renáta és gyermekeik Máté, Bianca és Robika már lefeküdtek. A tűzre felriadt szülők gyermekeikről próbáltak gondoskodni. Míg az anya az egyik szobában maradt a legfiatalabb Mátéval, addig az apa a másik szobába sietett, hogy a terjedő lángoktól megóvja Biancát és Róbertet. A két kiskorúval elindult az épületből kifelé. Mikor István a lángok fényénél meglátta őket, a sörétes puskával azonnal kétszer tüzelt. A sörétek mindhármukat eltalálták. Fogtam a Robi fejét az ölemben, csak azt mondogatta, hogy le, vagyis hogy lelőtték, csak már nem bírta kimondani. A kicsi unokám már nem igen volt észen, kapkodta a levegőt, csukott szemmel feküdt, és csak folyt a könny a szeméből. Annyi golyót beleengedni a csöpp 11 kilós gyerekbe, hogy száradnak ki a tüdejük. A ház lángokban állt. René a 2 éves Mátéval és a 6 éves sebesült Biancával toporgott a hóban. Pár méterre tőlük a véres hóban feküdt Csorbáni elsőszülött fia, a 27 éves Róbert, előtte pedig a kicsi Robi. Egy biciklit kért az 5. születésnapjára, június 8-ára. Csorba Róbert is fia még a helyszínen életüket vesztették, Bianca súlyos sérüléseket szenvedett. 2009. február 23-ára virradó éjszaka a szomszédban élő nagyapa, Csorba Csaba, a fia égőházának fényében hívta mobilon a dabasi rendőrkapitányt, azzal, hogy Jóska, bazd meg, gyertek gyorsan, kiírtják a családomat. Jóskáék, a dabasi rendőrök kiszálltak, és a magyar kriminalisztika évezredes történetének egyik legfelháborítóbb helyszínelését produkálták. A rendőrök összejárkálták a hóban a nyomokat, amit meg nem, azt szétvizelték, mert a szükség, mondották, még a friss halottak hevernek is a földön mellettük. Arról próbálták meggyőzni a túlélő feleséget és a kislány Biancát, hogy nem molotov koktélos, Ku Klux Klan stílusú támadásnak estek áldozatul, hanem bizonnyal szakszerűtlenül volt bekötve az elektromos vezeték, hisz cigányok tutira lopják az áramot. Valami szikra gyújtotta fel a padlásteret. A lezuhanó gerendákból kiálló szögek ütötték a sebeket Róberten és Robikán. Dehogy is sörét nyomok azok. Dehogy.
Let's go straight into the panel discussion. Each person has a short presentation to make, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Aladar first.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the topic of the hate speech and hate crime, I'm interested mostly in state-tolerated and state-generated racism, racial oppression and violence, and various types of apartheid-type crimes. According to the initial opinion of the Hungarian authorities, electrical short and smoke poisoning caused the death of young gypsy man and his little boy early in the night of February 23, 2009 in Tatár-Szentgyörgy. According to the Hungarian authorities, on the night of March 16th, 2009, in one of the Roma settlement in Miskolc, 9 members of a self-protection group committed racist, anti-Hungarian violence because they physically assaulted a car and thus frightening the Nazi Hungarians sitting in the car. In Tatár-Szentgyörgy, the local policeman who urinated, I don't know in English, in a footprint which was likely the attackers claimed that the ammunition casing found near the house were put there by the victims. Miskolc police accidentally found in the bush is a stick, and which "Death to Hungarians" was engraved. It was never proved whose it was on and if anyone used it. Still, this was sufficient proof of violence against the Hungarian nation, and 9 people was sentenced to a total of 42 years in jail. In Tatárszentgyörgy, when even according to the police there was a murder, who were named as suspects, yes, young Roma who were in custody for 11 months until the real suspects of terrorist pogroms were arrested. Not even a quiet sorry was said to the young Roma. In Miskolc, nearly all accused Roma suffered for 3 years because, according to the Hungarian justice system, Roma beat Hungarians and not Hungarians beat Hungarians. In other words, Roma living in Hungary are not Hungarians. In Tatárszentgyörgy, Robi, Csorba and Robika died for the same reason, and besides them 4, 5, 6, who know how many people, because they are not Hungarians. I care about in whose interests were and are the racial, socio-cultural and social considerations which separate us from the Hungarian people and the Hungarian political nation. Who stand to gain by isolating us from mainstream society and to view us as an exotic oriental nation or as criminals, criminals and pariahs, and thus estrange us from society. I'm interested to know what is the role of economic political selfishness in fomenting racial and ethnic hatred. Why can't the media be prevented from further inflaming anti-Roma passions? I would like to know how society and more preciously, thank you, the Roma who are outcast by society can protect itself against institutionalized racism by the state. Thank you for attention.
Stefania, I think you'd like to follow that.
Is it on?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So a few words about the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union at the beginning. This is a watchdog NGO established 20 years ago, and our Roma program was launched motivated by the serial murders and the inadequate investigative acts of the police in 2009. And this program aims at challenging institutionalized discrimination and other discriminatory practices, and also aims at increasing tolerance in the Hungarian society through public education activities. One of our main focus is hate crimes, and I will talk about it from 2 points of view, trying to give examples to you for the double standard that we experience during our work. So on the one hand, we see regular underclassification of racially motivated hate crimes when it's committed against Roma, and ineffective investigations. And on the other hand, we see that the police and other law enforcement authorities are very able and eager to find for hate crimes in many cases when people of Roma background attacked or committed certain crimes against non-Roma Hungarians. So examples to this first phenomenon, to this omission, would be the serial murders that were mentioned before. So only after the eighth attack and the fourth murder has the police established that there was a link between the similar crimes and identified them as hate crimes. The first instance court just this August, after 4 years, found that and recognized that there was bias motivation behind the crimes, and thus complied with international human rights standards. But there's another example for the reluctancy of the state in acknowledging these crimes. After the first instance decision came down, the Ministry of Tibor Navracsics, who is the Minister for Justice, announced that there will be a compensation provided for the victims and their families for the damages that they suffered, and the concrete plan should have been elaborated by the end of October, but nothing happened after the press release was launched in August, and the ACLU, which also provided legal representation to two families, has never received any reply to our letters sent at the end of August. Another example to this omission, to the first type of state activity or passivity, is the case of Gyöngyöspata, the events of 2011, where a couple of far-right and paramilitary groups were patrolling and marching through this settlement for almost 2 months, and threatened local citizens by accompanying children to schools and shouting at them, and no legal procedure for hate crimes were started or launched by the police ex officio, and there were a couple of procedures started by the police for minor petty offenses, but disproportionately fewer than that of started against members of the Roma community in there. And another example is a very recent one, and probably a most clearly outrageous one recently is the example of Devecser from 2012, where there was a demonstration in the city, and then marching started again, organized by far-right groups. And there were clearly inciting speeches, and it was not only that there was a clear and present danger at that event, but it really happened because afterwards the members of this group started marching to those streets where Roma lived, and started throwing rocks at houses. And there was no intervention from the police, no arrest happened on the spot, and a very recent decision came down that the police found no evidence to incitement to hatred. And as the Hungarian Helsinki Committee put it, if this is not incitement to hatred, then nothing is, and they initiated the procedure. Moreover, the police in this case identified only one person among the couple of dozens who can see on a video recording throwing rocks at the houses. Another example could be Konyár. I won't go into details because I try to keep my time limit. So on the other hand, we see the double standards already mentioned by Aladár in Miskolc and Sajóbábony. There's a tendency of misusing hate crimes laws against Roma, and only rarely to protect them. In both of these cases, Miskolc and Sajóbábony, we are very close to the serial murder. This is happening, this is 2009, and people are out on the streets trying to protect their community, and they are very fearful. And what they see, that there are dark cars passing through their settlements, exactly the way that they heard from the news. So they attack these cars, which is full with Nazi Hungarians. 9 men are accused in both cases, accused of hate crimes, and there are reports about some anti-Hungarian shouting, and in both cases the first instance court found them guilty of hate crimes. And the second instance decisions came down just recently. In the Sajó-Bábony case, the second instance court upheld the decision. However, in the Miskolc case, the perpetrators were only found guilty of hooliganism. And this second case has two positive points or two positive sides. One of them is that the court finds that the evidence supporting racist motives should be individualized, while in the Sajó-Bábony case, the court failed to apply the principle of individual criminal responsibility. And the second positive side of the case is that the court found that members of hate groups, such as these far-right and paramilitary groups, cannot be protected by those laws that were designed against hatred. What, however, the court failed to ascertain is that crimes motivated by fear, like in this case, cannot be classified as hate-motivated crimes, and also the second instance court failed to ascertain that if all circumstances suggest that something other than a hate crime was committed, or a classification something other than a hate crime, then purely the expressions used by the perpetrators cannot prove in themselves bias motivation. So, and the ACLU believes that these examples are very good examples for the institutionalized discrimination against Roma. And this double standard is clearly contrary to the intent behind the law. These laws were designed to provide special protection for vulnerable groups, such as the most vulnerable minority in Hungary, the Roma. However, on the contrary, in practice, how they are implemented, they further perpetuate the oppression of this group. And just for the lawyers in the room, there are 2 or 3 very interesting decisions by the European Court of Human Rights, one of them against Bulgaria from 2005 and another one against versus Ukraine from 2010, and this case law establishes that the state has positive obligation to provide special protection to the victims of hate crimes and investigate all the circumstances and evidence properly with due diligence in these cases. Thank you.
Andras, next. I would ask, yeah, I know you've prepared some notes, but yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So it's, I was already introduced being a journalist, but before and I had a law degree, and until the transition in this country, I worked as a sociologist. But it wasn't said about me that in the early 90s, a good 20 years ago, I covered pretty extensively the wars in the former Yugoslavia, and having this experience, I was really and clearly shocked when I read the charges of the prosecutor when the trial started. And that was a sentence which I think it's really a strong one. This sentence was that the intention of the perpetrators was to set up a private army and to initiate a civil war. I think that this is probably the strongest sentence what you can say about criminals in a democratic or supposedly free society. It was also mentioned that I turned from journalism to writing non-fiction and fiction, and to filmmaking. Everywhere when you hear about it's how to set up a script, how to make a film, what is before the story is the setup of the characters. Let me tell you some words about these 4 characters whom I was able to witness at the court for 2.5 years. So there is the guy who's first in charge. His name is Árpád Kis. He was born in 1967, and He was a high school friend of a friend of mine who is a Debrecen-born filmmaker, Szabolcs Hajdú. He's one of the best of his generation. He's around 40-some years old now. He said that at the time, Árpád Kis was a drum player at the high school years. He was a kind of a really good talent. He thought that at the time when they tried to make some music in the late 80s, they tried to make some Talking Heads type or Depeche Mode type of music. He was one of the best drum players, and he thought that this guy is something like probably the best prodigy among their circle of friends. This guy later on turned to another type of music. He became a drum player for a thrash metal band. Then he became like a sound engineer or so. Interestingly, this guy in around the year 2000 spent like 3 years in the state of Israel, working there as a guest worker or something like that. As far as I know, he lived in the southern town of Eilat. He was a waiter, and he worked for a car wash, and he worked for a delphinarium or something. He came back to Hungary and worked for the tax office, and so we can see that there was a guy who was like a pretty talented one, and gradually he went lower and lower and lower, and he became a sound engineer of one of the music clubs of Debrecen, which is like the second biggest city of Hungary. He had a wife, actually. His wife gave birth of a newborn during the killings, but he also had a mistress, and the mistress was the owner and the manager of this music club. I think that in a way, Árpád Kis is a kind of a symbol of the Hungarian transition, the last 20-some years, what we achieved here. And I think that this gradually stepping down, this is definitely reminds me somehow for a more universal thing. He has a crib brother. He's second in charge. He's 10 years younger than him. They live separately. They were children of divorced parents. And István was a born Nazi, so he was. He was born as a Nazi. He was 18 or 19 years old when he became a member of a local skinhead organization. Supposedly, he has like a half a square meter swastika tattooed in his back. I cannot prove this. I've never been to a sauna together, but he was actually a member of a skinhead group which sacrificed the Debrecen synagogue back in 1995. Then there is third in charge. His name is nickname is Dezső, and this guy he's normally bodyguard for mafia people. He's a strong supporter of the local Debrecen soccer club, of the so-called he's members of the Ultras, and by profession he is a trainer of fighting dogs for illegal dog fights. And there's a guy, a fourth in charge. His name is István Csontos. He's a well-built, tall guy, really kind of an impressive-looking man. He was a contracted soldier. There's no drafted military in this country anymore. He was a contracted soldier. He was member of the Kosovo UN peacekeeping forces of K4, and actually he became a member of a networked agent of the military secret service, which was called KBH in this country. That's the acronym. When I read that these people were detained in August 2009, I was really, I felt that something really stinks here. But it's not being like a professional journalist or staff writer for anyone anymore. so I just followed the things. But when the trial started, good friends of mine, László Majtényi, former ombudsman, and József Gulyás, who was a Liberal member of the parliament up until 2010, and he was member of the National Security Committee, they encouraged me to follow this trial. What I started, and I wrote a series of articles in the Életi Síralom, which is a kind of intellectual weekly, and later I was asked to help with editing this blog, this Cigányvadászat per blog.hu, which was mentioned by Nick Thorpe. So, you know, I went to the trials. Altogether there were like 160 trial days. I was present there definitely more than 100 days. And I think that that was very true what Nick Thorpe told in the beginning, that the approach of the court was definitely very technicist, very positivist, and they refrained to really ask for the motivation. They really, I mean, during the trial, we learned a hell lot about, you know, about how to research, you know, DNA and things like that, and the whole thing was, I mean, legally for me it was definitely very boring. But I think that the verdict was interesting, and I think that the verdict for me, it was 85 to 90%. It was right. What I liked in the verdict was that the act of terrorism wasn't mentioned in the verdict. If there would have been something that these crimes had a kind of a terrorist intention, and I think that this sentence in the charges, in the prosecutor's charges, so the perpetrator's idea was to create a private army and to initiate a civil war. I think that this is definitely a terrorist intention, and I think that this was a problem that it wasn't said by the court. I hope that the appeal court will use this paragraph of the Hungarian Penal Code. This is paragraph 261, as far as I remember. But you know, we can say a lot about that. The judge was a little bit uncertain. The judge was probably motivated a little bit politically, but I don't buy that much. Probably the timing was there. Probably they have chosen a judge who is known to be very slow, very kind of precising type of a judge, but it seems now that the appeal court trial days will happen actually in the middle of the election campaign in Hungary next spring. And I think it's definitely, it will have a political motivation. Of course, there's things, a lot of stuff, you know, especially with the military secret service, but also the different investigative institutions like the Nemzeti Nyomozó Iroda, also National Investigation Office, which is kind of FBI. Okay. I think it will be interesting. I will be happy to answer the questions later on.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Andras. You've raised a lot of things which I'm sure we'll come back to. One, to put a kind of regional perspective on this, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will focus on the situation in Romania and what Romani Crist, the organization I have been working for the past 7 years, has been doing in the area of Roma rights. Romani Crist, Roma Center for Social Intervention and Studies, is a Roma rights organization based in Bucharest, which was founded in 1993. The context around Romani Greece early work is highly relevant to the discussion today. The organization was founded in order to work in the Roma communities which were affected by interethnic conflicts. At the beginning of the 90s, there were several interethnic conflicts between Roma and non-Roma, either of Romanian or Hungarian origin. Around 37 were occurring in that period. The motivation of the conflicts was mainly to forcibly remove Roma families from the localities. In some of the cases, the non-Roma did succeed to have the Roma flee their homes and move to other localities. As the result of collective violence, ended up with burned down houses of the Roma and human victims on both sides. Although it happened back in 1993, the Hădăreni case, for example, is still being mentioned among people in the area as a best practice in getting rid of the Roma. Interestingly, it was not an extremist group who organized these conflicts, but average people, villagers, with the support of local authorities, in some cases police representatives, church representatives. What Romani Greece did back then was to work in several communities affected by such conflicts to rebuild the trust among the local community, as well as the confidence of the Roma population in the public authorities. The human rights-oriented intervention included targeted actions primarily in the area of access to healthcare, access to education, and access to justice. This remained of interest for the organization until today. That was the period when the concept of Roma Health Mediator was developed by Romani Greece. This was a project initiated by the organization which included Roma women with low level of formal education who were trained and hired to work as a bridge between the local community and the health authorities, doctors, hospitals, in order to improve the access of the Roma population to health services. The project has later become a public policy, and the program started being managed by the Ministry of Health. This was one example of how the actions developed by NGOs under extremely sensitive conditions and contexts can turn into positive actions. Unfortunately, as the paper of PhD Margareta Matake, who couldn't be today with us, indicates, reactions to extremism are most often coming from the civil society solely. There is a weak institutional reaction to such incidents, as their number is increasing in the past years. The EU framework for national Roma integration strategies does not tackle the issue of anti-Roma attitudes, although it was developed in the recent period when such extremist incidents are so widespread. At the national level, the reactions from the public authorities are even less visible, if present at all. On the contrary, what is characteristic of many politicians is to support the anti-Roma speech. As an example, a Hungarian mayor declared in 2000 that Roma from a particular area had no place among human beings, just as in the animals world, parasites must be expelled. This came after an earlier statement by the same mayor back in the 1990 that every gypsy should be shot with one bullet. More recently, at the beginning of 2013, Zoltán Bayer, founding member of Fidesz party here in Hungary, wrote, "A significant part of the Roma are unfit for coexistence. They are not fit to live among people. These Roma are animals and they behave like animals." This is not a characteristic only of Hungarian politicians, but of the Romanian ones as well. Such discriminatory anti-Roma statements have been promoted by the current Romanian president, Traian Băsescu, on several occasions. In 2007, he referred to a journalist as a stinky gypsy. Most recently, during a conference with Romanian businesswomen, he declared his concern towards the birth rate in Romania, calling upon women to respond to their patriotic duty and have babies, wondering how Roma women, and I quote, can have 5-6 children and the Romanian woman cannot. Oh, I forgot, Roma women are not managers. Politicians, media, leaders, and opinion makers in general are highly influential on the general public. Regardless of the reality, anti-Roma discourses have a tremendous impact on how people act towards Roma. In many situations, those who actually design and enforce public policies perceive Roma negatively. A Romanian mayor had promised to the citizens in his city during the electoral campaign that he would get rid of all the dirty bags around the city, referring to the Roma communities. In order to keep his promise, he started forced evictions of Roma, moving them in a former factory where there were still toxic substances right before elections. The same mayor has built a wall separating the Roma community from the rest of the area. Many other high-level Romanian politicians made discriminatory statements regarding Roma in recent years. 3 former ministries of foreign affairs, a former prime minister, as well as several other members of the parliament. Romani Greece has reacted to such statements, including by bringing complaints before the Romanian equality body, the National Council for Combating Discrimination, or before courts. At the beginning of 2013, a group called Autonomous Nationalists has posted on its website the following announcement. We offer a 300 lei reward, that is the equivalent of approximately 100 US dollars, to each gypsy woman from Banat area who can present a medical document to prove she has voluntarily undertaken a sterilization procedure in 2013. If they cannot educate their offspring as to stop being a burden for the Romanian society, we offer 300 lei for the voluntary sterilization procedure undertaken in 2013. The same organization has as objectives: solving immediately the gypsy problem, conserving the racial genotype of the genetic patrimony inherited from our ancestors, the suppression of the sense of guilt with regard to the so-called Holocaust, which took place in Transnistria, refraining from teaching the Holocaust topic in public schools until that period is objectively clarified, total opposition to multiculturalism and cross-breeding. Romani Greece, jointly with the Center for Monitoring and Combating Anti-Semitism in Romania, denounced the extremist group before the prosecutor office for incitement to hatred, as well as for the offense of denying, contesting, or justifying Holocaust, genocide, and its effects. This is an example which indicates how important it is that actions are common and that alliances are built for common purposes. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Juana. We've got 20 minutes, perhaps more.
30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Is there a microphone anywhere? No.
Is there a microphone? No. So we would just ask you then to speak up with your contributions and so on. And given that we've only got a relatively short period of time, if we could focus in this last 20 minutes, coming back to this title of the conference of lessons learned. We've heard a lot about what's happened, what's gone wrong, but we've also heard positive examples from each of the panelists as well. So maybe in your questions and in our further contributions from the panel, it would be very good to look at that issue of lessons learned and also ideas that people here might have or panelists might have about how to address some of these problems, and also new ideas. We've heard, and we'd like to hear, I'm sure, from Judge Cepeli about circles of tolerance. So there are a lot of good ideas around, and maybe we could try and focus on some of those and on the lessons learned in the next half an hour.
And everyone, please tell us who you are when you're speaking. Thank you. So, who wants to go first? Jörg, you want to tell us about circles of tolerance? Yes, you're called on.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for this panel. I was very much impressed. And well, the question really that can we derive anything which is something positive, something good can be got. I think that one of the way we can follow is establish such kind of civil movement from bottom up, because I don't think that this government will seriously take into account any important steps which Aladar was very right diagnosing. But I think there is the potential in the society, and this potential must be exploited. On the other hand, we have to see that it is a fight. So when I try to organize in some small villages the circle around tolerance, I was invited, it was not my choice. In many cases I got a call back, sorry, we cannot do it because the mayor is not supporting, the priest is not supporting, we don't want polarization. So on the one hand there is a strong support ideas which would diminish discrimination, which would fight racism, which would understand the deeper problems of this minority. On the other hand, a very, very strong countercurrent there are. So we are in a front line practically, and this is what we have to understand, this situation, and probably methods like that, and perhaps other methods in schools. Schools are very important fields, in small villages even. where in many schools on the level of kids I haven't seen any sort of conflict. On the level of parents I saw, but not on the level of kids. So much more effort must be concentrated on the civil layers of the society, and give strength those persons who would like to fight but simply do not know, do not see support around them.
Thank you.
Other contributions? Peter Molnar.
Thanks. I am here at CMCS at CU, and listening the talks, I would like to bring up the question of what are the criminal law limits of so-called hate speech in Hungary, because I think this is something we can make progress in, because there is a debate about this inside the human rights community. And what we heard also from Romanian examples, that there is a dehumanizing element in anti-Roma speech very often, and also Roma people are portrayed as enemies who are attacking us. And we know well that those are the two elements of incitement to hatred which are the most dangerous, because they exactly eliminate the moral orders not to commit violence. Because if they are attacking us and if they are not humans, we can just do whatever we want with them. And the example I mentioned, and I finish quickly, that Zsolt Bayer wrote, and this is just one example, that infamous article in January, in which he both used the dehumanizing language against Roma Hungarians, plus described Roma Hungarians as attacking other Hungarians. And then I think, and I say it with someone who loves the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union as well as the American Civil Liberties Union, I think the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union was too quick to say that dehumanizing speech didn't meet the imminent danger test in Hungary. I think it's arguable. One can argue, make serious argument for that article available online, any part of the country, including crisis places, with inflammatory situations, might have brought about imminent danger of violence. And I think we need to pay attention to that, and I want to raise this issue. What do you think about this case? Because I think this is crucial. Thanks.
Stefania, would you like to respond to that?
I knew I was going to get this question. Thank you. I will go back a little bit to Nick's question, what lessons were learned. And I think one of the lessons is that the situation is much more severe than we would like to think from here, from CEU, from Budapest. And this severity also includes the reluctancy of any kind of authority, any kind of state authority to act against discrimination or even violent attacks against Roma. And of course we relearn constantly how important education is, and working with the communities is, and cooperation. And that's why I really applaud this project, because it really shows how many people are working on the same issues. And coming back to your question, Peter, not really speaking about the particular case, because I don't think that really brings us forward, but I do see that in the case of Devecser, even if we said that there's more severe, or there's criminal sanctions against hate speech, when the Hungarian Civil Liberties Union would not impose criminal sanctions on hate speech. If you see this case when everyone agrees that the police should have found for incitement for hatred, and they are reluctant, unwilling, or I don't know what to do so, then I think we really should target the practice, the enforcement, the implementation of the law, and start with that, because I don't think that imposing even more severe sanctions on speech would have the effect that you claim that it would. And this is not to say that all those dehumanizing statements are not outrageous, truly disturbing or anything. I just don't believe that imposing more severe sanction on it would be the right way to go about, but we really should focus on enforcement of the current law on the one hand, and on the other hand increase cooperation against targeting this kind of speech. And what happened in that case, what you mentioned, that and I don't know how many, and I'm sorry for this, but a couple of NGOs wrote a letter to major companies, private companies in Hungary, in order not to advertise, not to put their money into this news outlet which published this article by Bayer, and that was actually quite successful. Some of the private companies changed their advertising policies, or others claim that they are not advertising. They were not advertising already just because of this. Just because of the ideology that stems from the paper.
Yes, someone at the back here.
My name is Skylar. I'm from the U.S. I'm a student at the Department of Public Policy here at CEU. And in the U.S., I was very involved in political campaigns. So I'm really interested to hear what you guys think about how there's an election in the spring and how you think the Jobbik Party will do, considering all of these very blatant acts of racism that they sort of maybe aren't directly connected to, but I think a lot of people are aware of the situation.
Sure. It's a slightly political question about the chances of a far-right party and less about the lessons learned, but perhaps we could relate that. I don't know, Andras, would you have a comment on that in terms of how dangerous also the election campaign might be? You've mentioned the particular timing of the appeal in the serial killers case. But how can it be, or how could, should there be an appeal, perhaps from the President of the Republic, I don't know, to, or could anything keep what's already a pretty fierce electoral campaign to make it less dangerous in terms of its potential for generating ethnic conflict? Or should it not? Should one not take that view? Should one use the election? If the trial itself was a missed opportunity, should an election be an opportunity to express and to lance the boil of ethnic conflict?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit too broad to answer this in a nutshell. What is about the trial? I think that this is pretty much obvious that the right wing, or the so-called center-right party of this country, is pretty much responsible for the change of the language, for the change of the public language, especially after 2002 when Mr. Orbán lost election. So I think that I would feel definitely a direct responsibility for the change of the language, at least. When we look at this particular case, that where did the perpetrators go? Quite a number of places were picked where the so-called Magyar Guard and the Hungarian Guard had actions previously, or right-wing media outlets like Here TV or Eco TV, or the so-called Kurucinfo, which is a extreme right website. They reported about clashes between Roma Hungarians and non-Roma Hungarians. So I think that this is pretty much obvious. On the other hand, the right-wing parties, Jobbik and Fidesz, they try to capitalize on the case that on the thing that these killings happened during socialist and liberal governance. I think that there's a pretty visible attempt to make personally responsible former minister who oversaw the secret services and the head of MBH, which was actually, because the name has been changed, but which was the civil secret service at the time of the killings. So I think that this is pretty much complex, and I'm pretty sure that it will be used during the election campaign. Otherwise, I think that to answer your question is really too broad, and we have a time constraint here.
I notice Andras Biro is in the audience. Andras, it is Andras. Yes. I know you weren't here at the beginning, but I wondered if I could put a question to you. I've just been reading your book, From Victimhood to Citizenship. And relating to this, I wonder if you would be willing to comment on your thoughts on the lessons learned from the serial killer's trial, and in particular, one of the points you make, and Nikolai George makes in the book very much, and it's a controversial point, and then I think I would invite Aladar to answer whatever you say, is that the Roma sense of their own victimhood, which has clearly been strengthened by these trials, is one of the biggest problems here in preventing the biggest obstacle, preventing their move towards integration and citizenship, that this constant sense of, among the Roma, that they are the victims, which is obviously strengthened by something as fierce as the attacks. Wonder if you'd be willing to comment on that.
I mean, one should read the book. But in the absence of this fact, I'll suggest that I wouldn't agree with the main obstacle, with the term main obstacle. The main obstacle is Hungarian history and Hungarian power structure. Because the responsibility is always that of the majority. This has to be underlined and clarified. It's another topic to see what are the internal obstacles of the oppressed which impede a change. There are many things to be said about that, but it's a topic we have, I at least, and in agreement with Nikolai, whom unfortunately we lost recently, we insisted upon that as long as the Roma movement has not leaders who are based on a democratic legitimacy, bottom up, or that there is not the mass of educated people who would change the power relationship. We cannot, we have to blame the power structure, first of all, the extreme right, but as well to say that the partner in this the other actor in this piece of theater piece is too passive and too and not enough defending its own interests. We know the reasons. There are many, and it's not the question to blame their lack of activity. But what those who could be blamed, if we have to blame anybody, is those who since 23 years have not managed to reinforce the Roma civil movement, and to make out of it a sort of a political weight, which could defend in defense of their own interests. Of course, very shortly, the black movement in the States is the only viable model, but I don't want to simplify things because the history of the black community in the States and the American society are quite different in their characteristics. So the simple transposition would be a mistake.
Thank you very much. And Oladao, would you like to respond to that, and also, I guess, to the question of what is the Roma responsibility now? What do you, as a Roma leader, what is the message that you and other Roma leaders should be spreading, should be offering to your own communities? If you need help with the language, either Andras or myself can help. If it would be easier for you, try it in English or try it in Hungarian and we'll translate.
I tried to English. We are very lucky because we have a lot of Hungarian friends. For example, Andras, and we have a lot of educated Hungarian friends who help for us to separate, to discriminate us, and to select in the Hungarian from the Hungarian majority. This is I think this is an ironic sentence, because the problem is the Hungarian Romani leaders had no power, had no supporters for create to the independent Romani organizations for the civil rights movement. It was a very hypocrite situation, 25 years, the last 25 years. We have no choice to create our independent and legitimate and educated Roma organizations. And our Hungarian supporters and foundations and international foundations also supported the governmental Romani organizations and leaders, and I think the situation is a continue of the post-communism. And in the new situation, we know we are very alone. We are very marginalized people, and we need to organize the Roma communities, the real Roma communities. We know this is the situation. We are in the ghetto, physically and philosophical and mentally ghetto, and we know we want to organize the Romani power in the ghetto to organize a groups and the communities for the anti-ghetto, for
the liberation from the ghetto.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. There would be one or two. Very briefly, would you like to comment on the same issue of victimhood and responsibility?
I think that in this particular discussion we are having on the Roma killings here in Hungary, it is rather inappropriate to speak about the Roma sense of victimhood, since in these particular situations they were actually victims. There's no question about that, and I don't think it's the question is not of whether how integrated or not they should be in order to prevent such things from happening. And what I would see as a lesson learned is that most probably, unfortunately, the lessons won't be learned by those who really need to learn them, and it's the Roma leaders and human rights activists in general still have the responsibility of having the lessons learned promoted, and having those who really need to have this lesson learned have them understand them. So the message would be to basically see what the lessons are learned and promote them to the right people, because they won't do it by themselves, unfortunately.
Thank you. There were some more comments.
Lauren wanted to make a comment, and there was a student or someone. Okay. Where's the microphone? Why don't we start over here and then we give it to Petra?
My name is Vlad, and I'm a student here in political science. And in terms of solutions, and in terms of dealing with authorities, with policymakers, with police officers, with prosecutors, is there a possibility to somehow train them to change their minds and souls? What solutions could exist that in these small rural communities we would have people that are more willing and able to deal with these sort of situations in a more appropriate manner?
Is there someone in the room who wanted to answer that question? Yes, there are two people in the room who want to answer that question. Is she answering the question? Yeah.
I think it's going to be related with answering your question. I'm Sebian Főzola from Macedonia, CEU student in Gender Studies. My lesson learned, and most probably the answer to your question, is that we need Roma in being in a decision-making process, because can you hear me?
No.
Not really.
Put the
Just
microphone
speak
a little bit
directly.
closer. Yeah.
Loudly.
Okay.
Direct.
Now it's better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold it directly facing. Yeah.
My lesson learned is that we need to be in a decision-making process to have the power and to stop, to prevent these kind of situations to happen. As Nicolae George is saying in the same book, he says that there are three ways of participations. The first one is being an advisor. Roma have reached that position, they are advisors. The second one is being negotiators. Roma have reached that position as well. They are negotiating about Roma issues. But the third position is that we have never reached, and that one is being in a decision-making process and having the power to decide about Roma issues. Because in the end of the day, it's not important what is said about Roma, but it is most important who is talking about Roma and from which position is coming. That's all. Thank you.
Next, there's a guy next to you.
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Javid. I'm from Bulgaria. I was also a student here at the CU. I'm public policy alumni. And to your question, if there is trainings, there are many trainings. Many of them came after the decision of the European Court of Human Rights, which says in their decision that there should be trainings for authorities, and none of these trainings is working. So I would like to share with you that I'm scared, because I'm from Bulgaria, and 2 days ago 2 people were killed, 2 people were stabbed just because of being Roma. A father and his son were walking next to a protest against the government. And just because they were walking, a group of ultras, or I would say they're far right, but for me this is not a politics. Politics is not about killing people. Politics is not about following someone just to get him beaten or stop them. So the father and the son were beaten very heavily, and stones were throwing against them just because they were looking darker, as in the movie was said. So I don't think we can speak anymore about hate speech. I think we speak about hate threats and hate acts. I don't think we can speak anymore about authorities, because the authorities don't exist. There is a what I wanted to say more, that I'm scared to go back to my country just because I look darker, and tomorrow maybe I will be just beaten up or killed just because I look darker. So I don't know what so one of the solutions was proposed here was the circles of tolerance, which means that we have to find our partners and our neighbors who are ready to assist us in order to have a better life. But as I can see, the Roma are getting angrier and angrier, and I think it is a good solution. Okay.
Nick, because I see an actual professional mediator in the back of the room who's raised her hand, then I'd like to go to this gentleman here who had his hand up. Petra Bard was going to say something. She's going to pass for a minute, but can we just go to those people in that order? First, Barbara, right back there. Here, please. Tell us who you are.
Thank you. I'm Barbara Felegi from 4C Research Group in Hungary. And also as mediator and trainer, I have to say I very much welcome this event and the way we have the ability to talk with each other. And what I was thinking, that the first responsibility, in my opinion, is based on the majority of people who are walking in the streets, traveling on the tram, see it, perceive it, and can't do anything, not because they hate Roma or they agree, they just don't know what to do. And I think one of the common roots is basically that anyone living or acting on any of the fields, privately or as professionals, are discouraged totally that they are not good enough. There are so many good teachers, good police officers, good judges, and even prosecutors, I would say, who try to believe and try to do, but they are just totally discouraged and put into the same hat as those who act critically. And I think it's deeply rooted in our cultures. I mean, when we give trainings to police officers or teachers, it takes us 3 days to make sure and to empower the participants, everyday professionals, that they can say what they think, they can feel what they feel, and it's okay, and there are things they do well, and they are good enough. And then we can turn to, okay, what they could do better. And I think that there are many people amongst us who just doesn't know they do good things because they are not heard. And when we work in settlements and try to involve, for example, Roma people in communities into mediation, we feel there so much time is needed to make them believe they are good enough to be able to sit down with the other side. And it doesn't take 2 days or 3 days, it might take years. So a lesson learned to me would be that you as really, how to say, people who have legitimacy and voice, especially the media, should really help those who do their everyday hero work and should make it loud and more visible. And it also, I think, relates to the legal advocate or civil rights movements to also point out what's going on well and who could be supported. Because if we get some reassurance that it's okay, we do what we can, and we are able to tell the others that you should not blame and say these words in the street, then we might act a bit more proactively. I don't know, just
we had a young man in the middle here who wanted to speak.
Thank you. I will speak without.
No, you need it for the film.
Hello, I am Tudor and I am a student at political science. I wanted to answer Vlad's question regarding if these kind of events are done, and they are done, and I do not agree that if these events are made and people know about them, they don't have an effect. But this process of making results, more wide, to get to the people, is not a short process, and this kind of events that are made with judges, with police officers, are very good, because these events try to show the Roma community as it is, not as it is perceived by the people. And as you told earlier, sorry, I don't remember your name, it's very important to do that and to let people know that some kind of work is done, and do not expect results like we have done this course today and tomorrow everything would be bright and shiny, because it requires a lot of time to have results, and the results are very little, but they matter.
I'd just like to add, we thought our results were very little in the United States too, and we now have an African-American president. So it's not hopeless. It's not hopeless. Not even here, it's not hopeless, I promise.
There are some more people at the back, but Ellen has pointed out that Petra Bard is here. Perhaps one person in the room with experience from the prosecutor's side.
Tell people who you are.
Please introduce, and I'm sure you'd be very interested to hear your comment.
Thank you very much. My name is Petra Bard. I'm from the National Institute of Criminology and Central European University at the same time. And maybe I'm the man with the hammer for whom everything looks like a nail, but I think that the question boils down to, the problem boils down to the question how to codify hate crime into the criminal code. And I think there are very, very important lessons to be learned, especially from the Sajó and the Miskolc cases to a lesser extent, although it's also relevant what happened with the serial killings. So my starting point would be that the sui generis provisions, so separate provisions on hate crime in a criminal code, have only a symbolic effect. I think the same result could be achieved also by codifying hate or hatred against certain groups of people as an aggravating circumstance of certain ordinary crimes. Nevertheless, the symbolic effect is very important. What is the message that the legislator wishes to send, and which are the target groups? Well, first of all, it's the majority, and it's the potential perpetrators, to whom the legislator wishes to send a message that certain crimes, namely crimes committed out of hatred towards the group, against a member of the group, are more heinous than others. Second, the legislator, the state, wishes to express its solidarity with the victims, especially if the victims suffered state-mandated discrimination or state-mandated oppression. It's not only true for Hungary or Europe. This is why race discrimination triggers strict scrutiny for the lawyers in the United States, because there was not only a state-mandated discrimination, but the whole society has been based on slavery. And third, and this is the third symbolic message, the state might just confess, acknowledge that it was unable to resolve social tensions. And anyone may fall prey to these social tensions, not only members of the minority, but also members of the majority. And I know that contradicts to the views of some of some of the colleagues here from human rights organizations. But this is a potential symbolic message as well, which will be relevant. So the legislator has to decide what groups deserve the heightened symbolic protection. First of all, it might look at international conventions, at international law prescribing, as Stefania Kaproncai said, the positive state obligations to protect certain minority groups and members of these minority groups. For example, the Genocide Convention singles out 4 protected grounds only, like race, national, on the basis of racial, national, religious, and just help me out. What is the 4th one? It's four. But what I would like to say is that gender is not mentioned, which is very important. Sexual orientation is not mentioned. So if the same crime is committed against a member of a minority religion, that might amount to genocide. But if the same crimes are committed against homosexual people, that will be an aggravated murder, but not genocide, okay? So one might say that these are the protected groups in a hate crime legislation. Second, one might look at anti-discrimination laws, for example, or constitutions. What are the protected groups that constitutional law singles out? And third, and this is the ideal stance, I think, of the state, to look at past discrimination, to engage in Vergangenheitsbewältigung, meaning face the past, what happened in the past, and face the current tensions in society. And probably the number of protected groups will be somewhere between the number of the protected groups in the Genocide Convention and the number of protected groups in a constitution. Now, if the state is unwilling to engage in facing the past, then in a less mature society, hate crime laws will just hit back. And this is what happened in the Hungarian case. In 2008, and I think this has not been mentioned, and this is very relevant here, there was a pride parade. There have been crimes committed against people who have been perceived to be homosexual, irrespectively of whether they were or not. And the state recognized that these types of crimes are not hate crimes, although they were clearly, in the ordinary sense of the word, hate crimes, or crimes motivated out of hatred against homosexuals. But it was not able to bear the political responsibility for that. And instead of extending the protected grounds of race, religion, now I cannot list them, to sexual orientation and gender identity, it just said that any group of society, majority or minority, having a power or not having the power, vulnerable group or not, will be protected by this type of legislation. Now, I have less problems with protecting the majority. As I said, in a situation where we are close to a quasi-civil war-like situation, even members of the minority might suffer from prejudices on the side of the minority against the majority. My problem is much more the protection of any kind of group, irrespectively of the characteristic that binds them together. In an absurd case, even racists would be a group who are protected by hate crime laws. Now, this problem could be remedied by the court, because the court does not have the political responsibility, it is counter-majoritarian. What happened, however, in the Hungarian Sajó-Babony and first instance Miskolc cases was that the court did not engage in a corrective function. The court added to the problem. So in other words, and I don't want to go into the details, it's very interesting how it added to the problem, and I just want to refer back to what all of you have said, that it basically accepted the racists' argument, that whenever the Roma are saying death to the Hungarians, it doesn't mean death to the racists, but it means death to the non-Roma Hungarians, which is a false contextual interpretation. This is not what they said. And I don't think that a member of a minority group who is constantly threatened can be made responsible for the fear that causes, or that is the cause of violence, which was imminent in the Hungarian cases. So my conclusion or my lesson to be learned in one sentence would be that we have a substandard law because of the majoritarian trap of the legislator, which is not bearing political responsibility for singling out protected groups. And the courts, in a radicalizing society, they are unable to fulfill their corrective role and they do engage in an aberrant interpretation of the substandard law. Now, the aberrant interpretation of the substandard law leads to the abuse of rights, and the state, and I know it's a very harsh statement, but I would claim that the state becomes a complicitor in the majoritarian oppression of a discrete and insular minority. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Petra. One more question, I think, from the floor, or comment from the floor at the back there. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Sandra, and I'm originally from Macedonia, although I work on my PhD in the United States. And over the past 3 years, I've worked with East Central European Roma migrants in New York. I've gone regularly to their meetings and organizings, and part of what they're seeing as kind of solution to the problems, even though Roma problems in the United States are drastically different from Roma problems in Europe, but they constantly are calling for pan-Roma organizing. All of their meetings are centered around that. I'm talking about, migrants. So whenever I bring up the issue of Europe, we have those tensions. On a one level, we need to locally organize, because what's happening to the Roma in Hungary obviously can be solved sometimes through the legal and political framework of the country. But at the same time, what I've been hearing today is, emblematic of Roma issues in Macedonia, in Turkey, Italy, Germany, United States. So it's not just typical to the post-communist transitional societies. At the same time, we know the European Roma Initiative and all those kind of pan-Roma initiatives within Europe. But my question is, again, to what extent is the balance between organizing locally and lobbying, or being bottom-up locally, but at the same time mobilizing, on the more international level, where a lot of the problems that we're seeing and that people here were talking about are happening across Europe. In Turkey, there was a law until 2006 that forbidden Roma to legally enter the country of Turkey, because Roma were listed, second-class citizen, and this was left over from the 1920s. Turkey government removed an entire neighborhood which was protected by UNESCO as a cultural site, but they relocated the Roma to build something over there. Relocations are happening in Italy. Fingerprinting in Italy started with Roma in 2010, and so forth. So we have this kind of needs to organize locally, but I'm talking about against the balance between pan-Roma activism and local grassroots activism.
Thank you very much indeed. I think we've got to wrap it up. We have to wrap it up. Sorry. So, would a last word, Alada? Just very, very briefly, just.
Hallottunk arról, hogy a nemzetközi közvéleményt mennyire fölháborító események jellemzik Törökországban, Olaszországban, és sorolhatnánk Franciaországgal.
Well, we heard about the cases that outrage the international public about things what happened in Turkey or Italy or France, wherever else.
Az a kérdés, hogy az európai intézmények azok képesek-e szembe menni azokkal az új szegregációs és apartheid törekvésekkel, amelyek jellemzik a válságba került Európát.
Well, the question is that the European institutions are able to contradict those phenomena what are very visible right now in Europe, all around Europe, where the continent and the Union is in crisis.
Tehát az Európai Unióban úri emberek ülnek, és azt gondolták nyilván, hogy a kelet-közép-európai államokat is úri emberek fogják irányítani.
Well, there were gentlemen sitting in decisive positions in the European Union, and they thought that probably the countries of Eastern Central Europe, there will be the gentlemen too who will be in similar positions, but probably they failed with their thinking.
Orbán Viktorral persze megismertek egy ilyen vidéki, nagyon dörzsölt, rafinált kisvállalkozót.
I refuse to translate this. Okay, so it's with Mr. Viktor Orbán. They learned about a guy who is like a country bum and though a kind of a refined political businessman, if I understand it correctly.
Azt is mondhatnám záróját, hogy rafinált olajcigány, de ez egy kicsit rasszista.
Or to use a little racist comment that he's like a refined, what is olajcigány in English? Vlachi rom or something like that.
Komolyra fordítva a szót, szóval az a gondunk, hogy az európai intézmények rendkívül lassúak, körülményesek, és nem megfelelően kompatibilisek a jelenlegi helyzet kezelésére.
The problem is that the European institutions are kind of slow and they are slow to move and probably they don't fit to handle situations what we have nowadays.
So lehet, hogy Amerikában és Kanadában kellene menedéket találni sok százezer cigánynak.
So probably for many hundred thousands of Romani from this region need to seek asylum in the United States or in Canada.
So that's an international solution from Aladdad. A local solution, Boana?
I would just like to end on a more positive note, let's say, and again congratulate the initiative which actually brought us together today, and this seems like a very powerful initiative, and I would really much like to see the idea which was raised from the audience that the everyday heroes must be seen by each of us and must be promoted by all means, including by the media, because this is how we empower people, and this is what Roma first of all lack, which is empowerment.
Andras?
Well, still a lot of things to say about this the trial. So I myself, I never claimed to be like an overall expert of the Romani question in this part of the world or just in Hungary. But you know what I think about that, it's what I definitely would like to do is when the whole trial starts and we will see that the whole circle of perpetrators, because be sure that not only these four gentlemen who are at the court right now were the perpetrators of these crimes, but there are still people who are at large who had something to do with this Roma crimes. So what I would like to do when the story finishes, to write a good book about it and probably make a film about it. I myself, actually, I'm more interested on the perpetrators than on the victim side, because let's say a good film was made on the from the victim's perspective. That won a Silver Bear a couple of years ago in Berlin, made by my colleague and friend, close friend Ben Fliegau for the Just the Wind. If I would do something like this, I would do something which could be called like Hungarian History X. So I'm more interested on that topic. That why the majority Hungarians think that this kind of speech and this kind of acts is possible in this country at this moment.
Thanks, Stefania.
Thank you. I think it's really hard not to agree with Petra's, at least the conclusion. I need much more time to understand every bit of the argument, but I definitely agree with the conclusion. And I think the lessons learned for me from this case and from other cases as well, that cooperation between the different stakeholders is crucial. The academia, the advocacy people, and the grassroots movement, and the persecutors, and people that we like to think that are on the other side. So cooperation and finding the people who are going or fighting for the same goals, it's really crucial. But I think what we really should learn, and I just want to echo what Oana said before, that we should find a language that that is reaching out to people that we normally don't reach out to. I think that's one of the main concerns of the human rights movement right now, is how to reach those people who are not convinced already, how to talk to those who are not with us already. And I think this is also a language question in a broad sense, and I think we should find ways to discuss issues that are of mutual concerns in a way that reaches wider audiences that we normally reach. And I think this event was an attempt to do that, and this was a good one. Thank you.
Thanks. A word from me in conclusion. Just a couple of ideas really in tune with what you've all been saying. There's a rather successful NGO in Budapest called A Város Mindenkié. The town or the city belongs to all. What about if we were to ponder or meditate on the possibility that a falu mindenkié, the village belongs to all, or even az ország mindenkié, the country belongs to all, and to find ways of encouraging people to tell their own stories, whether from a minority position or a majority position, or why do we have to belong to either the minority or the majority? Surely we can speak as ourselves as well. Thanks. Ellen.
Wow. Well, this has been quite a night for me. I've learned so much, and it's been incredibly rewarding that all of you came and stuck it out and were willing to listen to each other and share what you understand. And I don't like the idea that some people may leave discouraged. Those were very powerful images in the beginning. They were very painful, and the realities are very painful. And we're just starting to talk about it. We could go all night, but we can't. We have a reception waiting for us. So I will just end by thanking you so much and giving you a message of hope, which I love to quote. My husband and I both love to quote Václav Havel, someone that we knew briefly when we were living in Prague. And he said something very modest, but I think we can all take it to heart, because he was always a realist, really. He said, "We did what we could. When we did what we could, we found out we could do more. So we did more." That's it, folks. Thank you very much.